Technology is a problem. It's not the only problem, but it's contributed to a societal breakdown. Most people are very concerned to have some kind of purpose. I didn't really ever have a plan. I was really scared. I didn't know anybody. She said halfway through the evening, I suddenly realized I forgot to be scared. Real life begins beyond your phone screen.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Be Aware But Don't Care podcast. Hosted by Fabrizio Poli, today's guest is Howard Lewis, a collector of fine art, people, and powerful conversations. For over 2 decades, he's been hosting offline gatherings that bring strangers together in a world free of phones, pitches, and pretenses. In this episode, Howard and Fabrizio dive into the power of presence, curiosity, and what happens when we truly connect. No screens. No filters.
The first thing to say, just to take you back a step or two with regard to art, we don't have a business, we have a collection. So there's no commercial aspect. We were fortunate enough to be able to build up a collection of what are principally old master paintings, but which most people would probably refer to as classic art. It's really 15th to 18th century across all schools, styles, and so forth. So that is a collection which we have within my family, but we spread it very widely, by which I mean that we lend to museums, institutions all over the place. Many things obviously around the UK, a lot of things in Ireland, a lot of things in America, and other countries besides. And it's important in a way to mention that because I think it does touch a little bit upon the offline philosophy, because offline, which obviously you attended a few years ago, was simply a gathering of people. Without fear or favor, there was no sectoral bias. I didn't care where people came from, what money they'd made. What I really cared was what they shared and what they gave of themselves. Now, in a way, the sharing of art on one level, which my family pursued, was probably adapted in a different way by me in the sharing of people. And offline, at its core, was really simply about bringing people together, whatever their stripe, whatever their age, ethnicity, sexuality, income. I didn't really care about that kind of thing. The really important thing, what do people offer? What do they give of themselves? Because I think sadly in the modern world, technology is a problem. It's not the only problem, but it's contributed to, I think, an acceleration of a societal breakdown, which is going over the last 50 years. It's not some new phenomenon which has just occurred overnight. The technology is very helpful in some ways, but it's also deeply unhelpful in others. And the difficult thing is that most people are a little bit scared of living their lives without it. So going back a step, I created offline probably 15, 20 years ago as an idea whereby I used to read all kinds of publications, newspapers, magazines, whatever. I'd often tear articles out to read myself or pass on. And many times I would think to myself, Fabrizio would like this, and Jeff would like that, and Jennifer would like something else. And I decided to say people articles, just on a slightly random basis, things I thought they'd like, things I thought were interesting or well written. The feedback was always great. And I did it for probably a dozen or 15 people, no more than that. A bit random. It was not really organized on any kind of systemic basis. And one day I met one of the recipients with a bundle of articles to read over a coffee, and he simply asked me what everybody else was getting. He knew I sent articles to other people. I thought, that's interesting. Why don't I simply bring together a group of people, share a few articles, have some supper somewhere, and see where it goes? And it was a great success. And I realized 2 things. Firstly, that most people have a real appetite for information, for knowledge, insight. The other thing is that food's a great leveler. And when you eat with people, you learn a great deal about them. And I hosted this dinner, and it went very well. And I was asked to do another one, which I did a few months later. It simply grew by word of mouth. And I just have to say that I didn't really ever have a plan. I'm probably the most unprofessional professional you'll ever have on your show. Because people used to say, well, hang on, what happened next, or why, or how did I said, I had no idea. I just did it. And people say, what system are you using, what plans? I didn't know anything. I just sent an email to a bunch of people, say, by the way, it's dinner coming up on the 21st. Are you free? Pretty much. And people responded in kind. So the bottom line is that offline really is simply about bringing people together without any sense of consequence. In other words, in the modern world, most people are very concerned to have some kind of purpose. So you do something with an objective in mind. I remember very well something one guest said to me many years ago about offline. She said the reason it works so well is actually because there's no agenda and there's no outcome. 30-odd people come for dinner, lovely setting, good food, entertaining company, go home. That's it. I'm going to do anything. Nobody's got to write a report about it. Nobody's got to stand up and speak about themselves. None of that kind of thing at all. What it did really was actually to give people permission to be vulnerable. Most people, sadly, are very much more concerned with what may go wrong than may go right. And I don't worry about that kind of thing. I accept things will go wrong because that's life. The idea you build all kinds of incredibly complicated contingencies into a set of criteria is crazy. I used to find, something A doesn't go with B, I'll put B on another table. Don't like the wine, we'll get a different bottle. But I don't need to put together all kinds of very complicated plans just to obviate that possibility. So going
So
back,
it's not like a networking. So I mean, this is an important thing because I mean, I found it very interesting to attend your event a few years ago in London, where yes, I mean, at my table I had a filmmaker and a few other people from different walks of life. I had a student sitting next to me, a Russian student. It was a big mix and match of different people, and it was a very pleasant evening. Good food, good company, met some new people, and it wasn't like these networking events that are out there where everybody's going there to promote their business. And everybody's trying to play the part. And, I guess some people get something out of it. I mean, I've been and spoken at some of these networking events as a speaker when I launched my first book back in 2004. And yes, I sold a few books and that, but, it's not something that really, but I think what you're doing with offline, especially today after COVID, where things have got even worse, people are even more digitalized and more in their phones and online. And they find it, a bit daunting to be in company of other people, in particular strangers. How has offline changed after COVID compared to before COVID?
To be honest with you, I don't think it's changed a great deal. And what the first thing to say is obviously COVID was a complete disaster for my business for obvious reasons. And I didn't actually host a dinner for over 2 years as a consequence. I then did 5 more dinners in 22. And I then decided, December 22, that we were going away for a long trip in February the following year. And I decided actually it was a good point just to somehow have a bit of a refresh. And if I felt motivated to carry on with the dinners when we got back, great. And if I didn't feel motivated, that was also great. And to be honest with you, I got a bit weary of what I call the back end, the planning, the organization, following up, dealing with people's dietary requirements, making sure they're all paid, all that kind of stuff. The dinners themselves were great. Always sold out, lots of fun, interesting people on every occasion. But I must be honest with you, the other thing which actually was very much to my advantage was it gave me no excuse whatever not to finish my book. Because I started writing the book, you see, before COVID. I started writing it, and obviously I hadn't written it as in I sat down and started on page 1. It was really an accumulation of many stories. And I just pieced together in a slightly random fashion. COVID came along, everything was turned upside down in my life. Actually, the least of my concerns was COVID, because I didn't get. One probably the few people who didn't get it. But a lot of other things happened, which were very difficult and stressful, and I didn't have quick, simple solutions. Anyway, the book got pushed back, and not doing the dinners, and I haven't done one since December 22, enabled me to focus on the book in particular. And I was approached by other publishers, actually in my case in the US, and I was trying to deal with them last January. And the book came out about a month ago, but it was really cooking for quite some time, because many things I wrote about were in my head anyway. The challenge in a way for me was the fact that there were many stories which I'd never actually written down. And of course, when you're sharing them in front of an audience, you do have the benefit of tone of voice and body language, all kinds of nuances which you have to translate in a slightly different way onto the page. And it's not always quite so simple. Anyway, be that as it may, what I would say to you is, yes, you're right. I completely agree that the digital world has consumed people to a point where actually they're very much scared of everyday life. But what I've also learned is if you give people a chance, if you give them permission to be vulnerable, suddenly all bets are off. And to give you an idea about the scope of the attendees, the age range from youngest to oldest at offline was 70 years.
Wow.
The youngest person who ever came was 16. The oldest was 86.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned actually him in my book. He was a very interesting guy. So I was hosting a dinner on behalf of a corporate client. And one friend of mine who was coming said, by the way, can I bring someone? I said, of course. Instinctively, my first question was, well, what's her name? What's the story? And I was like bearing on the table plan. There's like a pregnant pause. And he says, no, what do you think? I said, what is it? He said, can I bring my dad? I said, your dad? I said, how old's your dad? He said, my dad's 86. He's as bright as a button. I think he'd love it. His father was great. I said, absolutely, bring him with. His father had won a silver medal in swimming at the 1958 Commonwealth Games. He had then become a very successful operatic tenor. And after that, he became one of the very first agents in the world of sport and music management. A really interesting guy. I mean, fascinating. I could spend all day talking about what he did and who we met and so forth.
Yeah.
But to give you a contrast, a 16-year-old, I had a lot of young people come to offline, but 16 was actually particularly young. Her mother is a friend of mine. Her mother actually is a perfumier. She creates fragrances.
Okay.
And I met her for a coffee one day. This is actually post-COVID. And her daughter came in to meet us as well. We were chatting about the dinners. She expressed interest. I said, come with pleasure. No problem. But I said, you come on one condition only. You understand this at the outset. I'll tell you this in front of your mother. If you come, you will not be sitting at the same table as your mother. You'll be on your own. Obviously, I'll put you with good people, sympathetic for a 16-year-old, but you will learn how to navigate some of the challenges of everyday life. People you've not met before, who are older than you, who look different to you, got a strange accent, but that's a good thing. Her mother was in the room somewhere else, so in a way it wasn't as though somehow she was thrown to the wolves, but it's just interesting that the contrast in people in terms of age, background, history, heritage, education, aspiration, everything. I didn't care. But what I would say to you, which is quite interesting in a different context, there are a great many people who struggle with the idea that somehow there is life beyond their phone. And that somehow, there is...
On their phone. That's a good one.
And I always remember one particular instance, which I will share with you and your audience, because it was quite instructive in its own way. So I was approached by a woman a number of years ago now who read an article about me in the newspaper. And she said, I'm running a very successful outsourcing company, probably turning over then 10 million or so, not insignificant. So I know my business very well. We're doing fine. I've got a senior board, business is good. But she said, I feel a bit confined by it. I need to stretch myself. I'd love to come to one of your dinners. I just feel it's something I need. But I also knew, and I knew this because she told me after the event, she was very diffident, very awkward, very unsure of herself. She said to me, when I first came to an offline dinner, I was scared. I was really scared. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what was expected of me. What would they think of me? Was my conversation interesting? What was my appearance like? Was I have to stand up and talk? Did they understand my accent? A million different things, most of which really were of no great consequence, but collectively cause people not to do something. If you are consumed with the idea that somehow everybody in the room has got nothing better to do than wonder about the state of your hair or what shoes you're wearing, you are much mistaken. Nobody cares about that kind of thing at all. The only person who cares about that is you. Anyway, I put on a good table, people who are very interesting, sympathetic. Anyway, the evening progresses and dinner and I'm talking and so
How
forth.
many people do you usually have at these dinners?
30, 35, roughly. I mean, sometimes a bit more, but I don't like it to be too big. If you make it too big, you lose the intimacy. But going back, importantly, to this story, halfway through the evening, I saw her at the other end of the room, very animated conversation with a couple of women. They had another bottle of wine there, having a great time. And I reminded her, I said, so what about all those fears and those inhibitions? She said, very interesting you say that. She said, halfway through the evening, I suddenly realized I forgot to be scared. I forgot. I was having a good time. All my fears were slipped away. And in a way, although it was a very graphic example, there were many people who fell into that category. People who were very awkward, people they didn't know, who didn't look or sound like them, or who would judge them, or not find their sense of humor very entertaining. Yeah, maybe, but that's life. And I think the problem with technology is that people almost try to create a perfect life where somehow everything falls into place at just the right time, where you get the kudos, you get the support, you get the appreciation, the love, whatever it may be. And life's not really like that. And I think what's important is that you accept that there are limitations to everything. And technology, and particularly digital media, is not some solution. It's not as though somehow 30 or 40 years ago, our lives were of no quality because we had no devices. Of course not. People actually got on very well. And the difficult thing is, unfortunately, in the modern age, people are far more concerned with what they go wrong than they go right. And I see it again and again, whether at dinners or just in public life generally. It's not changed a great deal. Part of the challenge you have is, unfortunately, although there's a great deal of emphasis upon children using phones with far too great a level of frequency, the real problem is actually their parents. Their parents have made phone usage an essential component of their day. If you simply say, okay, I'm looking at my phone twice a day in privacy, in the bathroom, when I go to bed, great. But people do it all the time. Every time the thing pings or they get a photo or a message, they feel compelled for some strange reason to respond, as if they've got nothing more important to do. And that, to my mind, is a big problem.
Yeah, very true. So these offline events, you still do them now in London?
I haven't done one since December 22, but I could do. I mean, I get asked all the time to do events. If you said to me, by the way, can you put, with pleasure, why not? But I have to say that I felt it was a bit of a refresh. I wanted to get the book done. So obviously I started writing it before COVID and I wanted to get it done. So I'm not doing them currently, but they're always on the agenda.
So have you just done them in London? I remember a few years ago you were doing them elsewhere as well.
No, I didn't in the, I was approached to do it many different places, all over the world as it happens. And so Mumbai and Zurich and Tel Aviv and New York. But a good friend of mine is a diplomat. And at the time, he was the deputy high commissioner or the high commissioner in Pakistan. And he said, I love you to come and do it. I said, no, I do it for you. I'm not going all that way to one dinner. I'll do 3 dinners.
Yes.
I'll do one in Islamabad and I'll do one in Lahore. Whatever it may be. So I get asked a lot, but in the end, the question really is the level of complexity involved. I mean, for me, you see, I've got a very uncomplicated approach. I simply say, look, dinner at 7, be there, and that's the end of it. But I don't worry too much about the fanfare. And the fanfare today, whereby people are given notice, and it comes all kinds of bells and whistles, it doesn't really work for me. I keep a very, very low profile, whereby I'm really the least important person in the equation. I want people to feel, in a sense, that everybody has relevance, everybody has meaning, everybody has something to offer. Of course, but we live in a very competitive world where people are either comparing themselves both to others and indeed to what they've done themselves in the past. And that's also a problem. So I'm open to anything. I have no problem at all. But the very nature of offline is it is rather impromptu. If you said to me, by the way, can I do a dinner for 30 people on Tuesday? Yeah, probably. Roster up enough people from wherever. And whether they are 16 or they're 86 or somewhere in between, I don't really care.
So do you think now the book's getting out there, obviously, and the message? I mean, if you were to distill the core message of your book in a single sentence, what would it be?
Look, as it happens, the core message is on the inside flap of the book. And that is, in fact, that real life begins beyond your phone screen. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, in my book, Be Aware But Don't Care, I talk about, is the smartphone really smart or is it a dumb phone? As in, it makes you dumb. But you're right. I mean, the phone today, we can connect with, through WhatsApp with somebody in Tokyo from London. And it's great to be able to have that phone call on a video call. It's free if you've got Wi-Fi. I mean, it's great to be able to do that. But you're right. I mean, when you walk down Oxford Street today, most people are on their phones as they're walking down the street and they're not looking around. They're not, going for a walk in the park. Everybody's on their phones, or they've got these watches that ping them when there's a message, and then they immediately pick their phone up, and it's,
But why is that, do you think, Fabrizio? Why do you think people are so compelled to look at their phone and pick up messages? Why is their life so empty otherwise? Why can't you not go for a walk? Or why can you simply go to a movie or phone a friend or write a letter or go to the library? I mean, whatever. These things are not expensive or difficult. It's not as they are barred from going to the park or the library. It's all available, but people don't. And I think the difficult thing is that most people have a very strong desire to be a part of a group, a tribe, a gathering of some kind. And the desire to be a part of it, even if it's not actually a very good thing, is much more powerful. And that is why huge numbers of people join social media platforms, not because there's actually any particular benefit, it's just everybody else is doing it, and therefore there's a sense of safety in numbers. Enough people are doing it, somehow it gives me the confidence it makes sense. And I can justify it to myself and to other people. Well, you can justify what you like, but at the end of the day, it's a rather empty life. if you're not able to embrace what you see, what you feel, what you hear, and to be present, to be mindful, I think it's a wasted life. The idea somehow you prioritize your phone over personal relationships, knocking on somebody's door, waving to somebody in the street. I'm sorry, I'm not in any way anti-technology. I'm not anti-offline for that matter, or anti-online, I should say. I just think there's too much of it, and people are not actually able to engage. I had something remarkable the other day, which I think it was in America. Young kids, girls, who see somebody in the street who is unfamiliar, who may come towards them. Their first instinct is to pick up their mobile phone, put it to their ear, and have an imaginary conversation with somebody just to avoid any face-to-face interaction with somebody in the street, or texting a message frantically to nobody, tapping the letter Z 173 times in succession. Why? Well, because people are a bit scared, a bit fearful, and do not have the confidence to approach people who may actually be great company, may have their best interests at heart, may have things in common with them, but somehow they convince themselves that there's some scary monster just there to trip them up.
Well,
Crazy.
I'll tell you an interesting thing. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the more church some people call it. We've got the missionary training centre near where we live here in England. And the manager of the missionary training centre told me, this was a couple of years ago, when one of my sons was going in for his training before he was going on his mission. He was saying, we are having a bit of a problem with young people today, because on your mission, you sit in front of somebody and you talk to them and you're teaching them, the gospel. Young people today are so used to being in their phones that they struggle face to face. And this was a trend that they were finding, that more and more of these young people coming in, and they're like 18, 19 years old, these kids, and they come in for 3 to 6 weeks training. And, the big obstacle is, getting them in front of people. I mean, are they going to be able to stand up in front of some people and teach a lesson? Or are they going to be able to sit down with somebody and talk to them face to face? Eye contact is a thing that they had to keep stressing to these young people. You've got to look someone in the eye when you're talking to them. But people are just so used to their phones. And this is not only happening in my church, it's happening all over, where these young people are basically born with a phone. You see these little kids of 1, 2 years old with their dad's iPad in their hands, and they're playing on these digital devices. We have to be careful with our new rising generation that they do learn how to communicate with people face to face. I mean, I love meeting people online, so to speak. And, we do a call like this, and you get to know somebody, do 2 or 3 calls, business calls. But it's so great then to jump on an airplane, travel halfway around the world and meet them in person. It's great to do that. But, you also have to know how to, relate to people in person. And a lot of these young people today, they're not getting that experience as they're moving way up. I mean, what do you hope readers will take away from your book? And what lasting impact do you aspire to create as a result of this? Because obviously your book is very much needed right now.
Thank you. I think what I would say first of all, Fabrizio, is that there's a duality to offline. So obviously, on the one hand, yes, I want people to use technology less, not to ignore it, clearly. But the other aspect is that offline is really about wandering off the beaten track. Just explore, experiment, go somewhere different, try a drink you haven't had before. Walk up to somebody who looks vaguely familiar, take a bit of a chance. And I think people are very much more worried about the possibility of rejection or mockery or denial, or somehow in the sense that they are out of place, or they're behind the curve, or they're beyond their sell-by date. A million different reasons, most of which are fairly spurious, frankly. But if you believe them enough, and enough people around you also believe, it's like an echo chamber. That's all you hear. And the great irony is that most young people, if given the chance to drop their phone, would do so very willingly. That's the irony, you see. It's almost as though somehow the notion that you can have a fulfilling and interesting and exciting life without using your phone is almost some kind of remarkable revelation. The notion, as I said before, 30, 40 years ago, when I was growing up, there was no technology. It was obviously a very limited degree. I mean, I can remember, give you a bit of context, I can remember talking to my kids when they were quite small. This is probably 20 odd years ago, more probably. And we had Sky Television. And obviously you subscribe and different channels. And I had a conversation with them where they had great difficulty understanding how I managed to live my life with only 3 channels: BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. That's actually fine. That was all I knew, and in a way, that was great. I didn't have the heart to tell them When I started watching TV, it was in black and white. I mean, black and white, what kind of crazy idea is that? What are you doing here? If you go forward 5 years, no doubt you will have your own personal avatar starring in a film which you probably co-wrote or co-directed, but it's obviously now the way in which information is dispersed enables you to take on almost a kind of directorial role. Yeah. But at what point is actually that representative of real life? And real life to me is about just the physical aspect of either eating with people, playing sport with them, going for a walk, sharing a joke. It's little things, not even very complicated, it's all very dramatic, but somehow people have talked themselves out of it. They're somehow sort of appropriate, or there's no benefit to them. In other words, I'm not going to do something unless I can see some tangible benefit. I'll get some kind of financial reward, or I will be liked by more people, or I'll be at the top of a search engine, or whatever it may be. I think sometimes the simple pleasures are the best. And there's a great joy in a way, walking early in the morning when the sun is just glinting through and you can feel the slight burn of the sun. Marvelous. It's quiet and you just hear, your dog, child, whatever it may be. Yeah. But the sense of somehow being in a place and really enjoying that moment is much underrated. And I think somehow the technology is fine. Technology is very good in some ways. And obviously we're talking about here personal technology. Clearly, other technology is great. Whether it's frankly the electric light for your planes, for example, all technology, of course. But I think the problem, in a way, is in a personal context. People struggle with the notion that somehow there is a better life out there. And although there are no doubt all kinds of neurotransmitters which influence our behavior, when we look at things and we respond in a particular way, nevertheless, I think what matters most of all is simply that you are present. Doesn't mean you can sit there in the corner and say nothing, read the paper, I don't care, have a drink, I don't care what you do, but somehow give me the impression that you are vaguely part of this world. You haven't slipped away in some kind of parallel universe, which is really not real. I said in my book somewhere, there are basically three kinds of connections: warm, lukewarm, and cold. Warm are people you know very well, your close circle, and so forth. Lukewarm people you knew once and actually got on very well for different reasons. The relationship passed, or it just ebbed away. But it's all there to be rebuilt. Cold connections, basically, probably you meet online. And most people you meet online, you're never going to meet in person. Now, you and I are fortunate enough whereby, if push came to shove, we could hop on a plane or take a train and physically go and see somebody. Not everybody has that privilege, of course. But even then, just the simple idea of engaging in the basics. I mean, I say to people quite often, people say, how do I just engage in everyday life without it being complicated or difficult? I say, it's very simple. Smile. Smiling is a very powerful emotional tool, far more powerful than any app you're ever going to have on your phone, frankly. Say please to people more often, or thank you. Open the door for somebody. Look behind you when you walk through. Maybe somebody behind you is old, they've got shopping, or small children. But people are very kind of casual and rather flippant and don't pay attention to what's around them. And that's another problem. These aren't complicated maneuvers. It's not as if somebody saying, I've been away on a course for 6 months. What are we doing? Learning how to be polite. Really? Not difficult. So a lot of things I reflect, and obviously offline, as I said before at the beginning, is a gathering of people. I didn't care where they all came from, whether people were involved in banking, tech, fashion, politics, whether they were in a charity, whether they were in an environmental fund, whether they were 63, 23, 93, I didn't care. What mattered most of all is what they gave, and their curiosity in other people, their desire to share, to listen, to learn, to give somebody their attention. Not difficult. But people have fallen out of the habit. To your point before about, the young boys who are part of your mission, or, not able to look you in the eye. Look, I hear you. And it's not confined to any one country, one religious group, even one demographic. There are people who are every category who are vulnerable to the same problem.
I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, technology is great, and I think we need to use technology.
Sure.
But doing these events, I think these are. I mean, I thought it was really, really cool the way you went about.
I'm doing, come again. Bring all your friends. I mean, I look, frankly, Fabrizio, I do an event with you. If you say, by the way, can I do something with you in Arizona or anywhere else? Of course, why not? I mean, look, I'm very open and very collaborative, and I've learned over a period of time that actually there's far more that connects people than separates them. But people have a tendency to reinforce what they can do really, really well and ignore everything else that they can't. As if somehow...
we live in a world where, they try and breed contention. Okay. The gays against the straights, the blacks against the whites, the Trumpers against the non-Trumpers, the Arsenal supporters against the Chelsea supporters, men against women, boys against girls. They try and create, the system is kind of designed to create contention. When, as you said, and it's true, I mean, my time as an airline pilot, and I counted this, I've flown with 65 different nationalities. I've shared the cockpit with pilots from 65 different countries. And of course, the common language is English because that's what you use in the cockpit. And you need to communicate and work with this person in a high performance environment. But you're right, everybody's looking for the same things. Everybody wants love. Everybody loves a smile. And you can cooperate with anybody from any color, religion, race, sexual orientation, whatever. There are commonalities between human beings, but you need to look for those commonalities and celebrate them.
Look, I think the problem you have in part is a lot of people are quite lazy. One shouldn't admit it quite so openly, but I think that is a reality. I'm not suggesting they're necessarily bad people, but they make the minimum of effort. They don't move out of their comfort zone. They only do something if their best friend is there. And really, in the end, that's really a rather weak effort at life. We all have our own challenges, and some people are better at one thing rather than another, which is fine. I think one of the difficult things is, unfortunately, people are quite competitive and they want to feel as though somehow they have some mark over you, or they can reinforce their particular gift or talent, which is fine. But I think sometimes to do that alone, without having that kind of human embrace, without having that warmth, that smile, as you say, that sense that actually you're pleased to be there, not there under sufferance. And I just think to myself, in the end, let's keep life simple. There are enough challenges in life anyway, just getting from one end to the other without hopefully major mishap, war, pestilence, crazy political systems, etc., etc. I think somehow the idea that you cannot talk to somebody or wave to them or simply smile in passing. It's a bit like, in a way, leaning into a joke you don't quite understand, but the punchline is so great that actually you carry on laughing at everybody else. That's a good thing. Doesn't matter whether you actually jump at the epicenter of the group. What matters is that there's a sense of goodwill around you. If you feel that, you tend to share with other people in turn. And I use the notion of, I think somewhere in the book as well, when you're in a cafe, order a coffee, buy one for the fellow behind you. Why? Why not? Well, because for the sake of £3, whatever it may be, somebody else may follow your example and follow suit in a different way. It's all about, in a way, being a bit more aware, a bit more alive, a bit more sensitive to your surroundings. Just somehow, in the same way as a dog will sniff the air, people just sniff the air a bit more. You may find there's some strange, surprising aroma coming from one direction rather than another, or maybe no aroma at all. But in a sense, I just feel, just get out and live your life. I think the problem in a way is, when you are able to essentially manipulate data, manipulate images, you're much more familiar with these than me, but what I can say is I know that you can become a completely different person. And the idea at some point through AI, whatever, you can effectively have your own robot who will basically be your mini-me and will do all your things for you and somehow reflect your voice and your manner. I think bad news. I think bad news for humanity. By all means, encourage innovation. By all means, encourage fresh ideas. And occasionally people make mistakes, of course. They nature any kind of progress. But I just think to myself that there's also a harshness to the world around, as though somehow, if you are a bit peculiar, a bit odd, a bit different, somehow you're shunned, as though you are breaking the mold, as though you are not one of us. You do not subscribe to a particular point of view. Crazy. I'm a great believer in variety, surprise, unpredictability.
Yeah, but also one thing you were saying, you touched on, the fact that, all these online systems and that are getting people to compare themselves and be competitive. And this can cause all sorts of problems in people, from becoming prideful to, having mental issues because they feel they're not as good as anybody else. And that I think we need to focus more on who we are, discover who we are. And you're not going to discover who you are by spending all your day in your phone. Go out and try stuff, play in a sports team, for example, do things to discover more about you and who you are and try and develop yourself. And interacting with other people is a way of discovering more even about yourself. But I think this competitiveness that's out there, this comparing, this, this against that,
Yeah.
it's not doing good for people because it's creating prideful people on one end and people with mental issues on the other. And having self-esteem is important, believing in yourself, knowing that you have some talents, because God has given talents to everybody. Some have 5, some have 10, some have 20. But if you go through life watching people on Instagram and TikTok and seeing how they live their life instead of discovering, I mean, I always think of Susan Boyle, the lady that won the X Factor. She stepped on stage. Simon Cowell thought, who's she? Where's she come from? But as soon as she opened her mouth and started singing, then the next question I asked myself was, where's she been all these years with that incredible voice? And there's so many people out there that, live through life and they don't discover who they really are. They don't discover the talents they have because they're busy comparing themselves to everybody else. And they don't realize, wait a minute, you're good at playing the violin. Why don't you take it to the next level? Oh, I'm too busy watching TikTok.
I think that you make one or two good points. I think the reality of the matter is that, unfortunately, yes, the fear factor is a big part of this. Just the idea that, me, I mean, they want me. I mean, what so somehow, I used to have a slightly different context in the art world. If you talk to most people about the art world, they will say it's all about Sotheby's and Christie's and high-profile sales and tens of millions of dollars and all kinds of famous names. The truth of the matter is, yes, that's a part of the market, but the truth, more importantly, is that it's a very, very tiny part. There are hundreds of auction houses who are great selling stuff which you probably wouldn't ordinarily see. Some of them are regional, some of them have got to special. In other words, if you dig a little bit deeper, and most people are very superficial, they just look at the headline news, don't really look at any further. If you dig a bit deeper, you'll find all kinds of wonderful things waiting to be discovered. But they're not actually going to announce themselves to you. You've got to actually make an effort and do it yourself. Now, you could, for example, as you say, go for a walk, go to the theatre, you could go cycling, swimming. In a way, the thing is where having a phone actually becomes an impediment. It gets in the way. Nobody goes to the swimming pool with their phone in a waterproof jacket. Yeah.
So question here then, Howard. When people come been to your events, do you make them put their phone to one side?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And another thing is, what I liked is when you said that lady who was scared, and then she came to the event and she was so busy meeting new people and chatting to people, she forgot to be afraid. Now, in a situation like that, she was being herself. She was discovering stuff about herself. And guess what? Her fear disappeared. So how much more can that woman do now in her life thanks to that experience?
Look, I think a lot of people probably do a lot more with their lives. I think you and me included. I think, what I always do at the very beginning of an offline dinner to give people any kind of, reassurance is that I am reliably hopeless at most things myself. But so what? I mean, I can host a dinner. I know interesting people, fine. But I mean, lots of things I can't do. I believe me, I can't fly a plane. I can't cook. I can't fix a plug. I can't speak any other language than English. But so what? Nobody's keeping score. And this is the problem in a way. People have this idea that someone somewhere is keeping a score. Well, I'll give you a 6 out of 10 for that. That was probably a 4. That would be a bit better. Crazy. I think that most people are actually their own worst enemy because they create either unrealistic expectations or, moreover, they spend their time with people who are essentially going to reinforce their own belief systems. And that's often not good. It's not to say that, your business is your belief system is better than mine or vice versa. It doesn't really matter a great deal. I think what matters most of all is you're open to fresh ideas. Just the idea, you might be a Mormon, great, okay, but maybe so next month you'll go to a mosque, and the month after that you'll go to a temple, and the month after that you go. And I think I wrote somewhere in my book. I was in Mexico, and I went to a synagogue one morning. It was a very, very orthodox congregation, far more so than I would ever go to in a mainstream way. But I was there. It was always vaguely recognizable, but in a way that was fine too. The idea that it was a little bit strange, and they looked at me as though somehow I was almost kind of, an intruder, into their little world. But that wasn't about. So it keeps you on your toes a little bit. I just feel somehow if you don't have a sense of wonder and a sense of surprise and curiosity, and obviously offline as I mentioned in the book, is really a celebration of the virtues of randomness and serendipity. You just don't know who you're going to meet and what the conversation may be and where it may take you. Now, I will show you actually a very interesting story, two stories. One in particular is quite brief. About a month ago, a bit longer, I was on the tube in London, pretty late morning, the pub was fairly empty, and the doors open, and suddenly 25 kids all piled on, with a couple of teachers in tow. And it happened there was a chair next to me, spare. And this boy, probably no more than 11, 12 maybe, sits down, puts his bag on the floor, turns to me directly, and asks me, looks me in the eye, as you point out importantly before, how's your day been so far? To which I thought, yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, you know, at the very least, I show him the respect as a 12-year-old, ask the question, and respond in a meaningful way. And I said, actually, fine, what about you? He said, wonderful. He said, we're just coming back from a trip to the Globe. And if you're aware of the Globe, the Globe was the original Elizabethan theatre created in Shakespeare's time. It was basically reconstructed about 50 years ago. Still an extraordinary thing. Just the physical concept and the history behind it and so forth. Shakespeare, we chatted about that for probably no more than, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes. They got off the train, they took to another line. But in that 3 or 4 minutes, I thought to myself, there is actually hope for humanity. Here's a little kid, yeah, who didn't instinctively pick up his phone, scroll through a video, whatever, or look at the ceiling, whatever it may be. He talked to me, okay, quite a confident kid, by comparison with most. But the fact of the matter is, he was interested in what I had to say, and I showed him the respect to be interested in what he said. Now, I won't say it again, no probability, but that was a wonderful thing. Just the idea you can talk to somebody, whether on the tube or in a queue, and whether you comment on what they're reading maybe, or where they bought their shoes, or where they came here last time when there was some, I don't know, some remarkable event occurred. Doesn't really matter a great deal. You don't need, you see, I think this is a big challenge for a lot of people. You don't need to start a conversation with some extraordinary comment of, you know, note or significance. Someone's a throwaway line. Maybe you point to something, or you share the same joke, or you see something that's quite funny, or maybe a bit shocking as well. And that's enough to have a connection. You don't need any more than that. And I think somehow, because of the technology, people forget or somehow lose a sense of other people's responses. You need to be aware of and alive to what's going on around you. Just listen well. You can't listen very well. You've got a headphone on, that's for sure. You can't watch the traffic if, like a schmuck, you're walking the road looking at your phone. God forbid some people have an accident or cause an accident for other people just through their own stupidity and selfishness. You know, somebody falls over in the street, trips up because they're looking at their phone, didn't know what they're going, I've got no sympathy at all. I think myself, hopefully next time you won't be such a schmuck and you'll look what you're doing and you put your phone away. Nothing is actually that pressing. You've got to have your phone with you all the time. You can equally fall behind somebody in a minute or two, where it's quieter, you've got more space, you're more considerate of other people around you. But nevertheless, people are a little bit selfish, a little bit lazy, they're self-obsessed, and they just don't think. But most of all, the fear that you will be found out, the fear that you'll be excluded, the fear that you'll be marched out of the room by security, and not only that, your name will be besmirched forevermore. Crazy, crazy. But people do it. And people who are, in some cases, very senior indeed. Often the worst culprits are senior leaders. That's the problem as well. And one rather assumes that senior leaders have some kind of special gift or special talent which carries on above. They don't. Often they're just as vulnerable to all these problems as everybody else. So anyway, what I'm saying in a nutshell is that, yeah, all these things to my mind are about being present. And the dinner, and I can do anything, frankly, whether it's a dinner, you know, I can say to you, saying, guess what? Change the plan, no dinner. We're all going to actually have a picnic under the oak tree in the park. Great, wonderful. You know, who's it? Okay, we basically see, okay, somebody says, okay, well, I'll bring the food, somebody else got the wine, somebody else brings a rug. When you're there, okay, who sits down first? Who waits for maybe the seniors to get there? You learn about people's, you know, understanding of social skills and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. All very important indeed. And I think, again, you see, the fear of being wrong means people saying, listen, I'm not available. I can't make it. I'll come next time. Why? Because unfortunately, in many cases, they're far more concerned with what may go wrong than may go right. You may find something absolutely fascinating who you never spoken to before. Maybe the same department, somebody downstairs. Doesn't matter a great deal. But people don't do it. And this notion that you do everything possible to present yourself in the best possible light. No, it's a fool's journey. I like life with all its chinks and crookedness and things which don't work as they should. Because in a way, that's why it's quite interesting to me.
I think there's a lot of power in these events that you're going to resume doing soon. The agenda is no agenda. I mean, I think that's great. Just come, let your hair down, be yourself, meet some new people you haven't met before of different ages, different nationalities and whatever, and just tune in and enjoy.
Yeah. I think that the simple thing really is there's no great mystique to it. As long as I create some remarkable discovery, I didn't. All I said was, I don't really care about rules. I don't care about conventions very much. I care that people come in the right spirit. If you come with an open mind and a generosity of spirit, typically you'll be rewarded on the upside. But generally, I've heard from a lot of gentlemen, a lot of people all over the place. But nevertheless, there is a certain kind of universality. People, wherever you're, probably people in India, whether they're talking about in South Africa, whether they're talking about America, have the same problems. It's not as if something's unique to here or the US or anywhere else. It's everywhere. And the real challenge, frankly, in the future is actually how you're able to wean off people this technology. And there are all kinds of retreats which have now emerged. People are unable to put their phone away. People take their phone to bed with them. I mean, why would you want to do that? Read a book. You'll sleep better. Without the knowledge or memory of flashing lights in your eye.
The book thing is interesting because when the e-readers came out, I got myself a Kindle, and I remember being on the tube in London once and all these people reading their Kindles, and so I bought a Kindle. Maybe I'll buy books on my Kindle. Now, I do use my Kindle. I'm still buying physical books. I'm still reading. I mean, I'm surrounded by books here. I mean, I'm terrible because I can never read one book at a time. And I think I'm reading 6 books at the same time.
That's a blessing, though, Fabrizio. It's a blessing. It's wonderful.
But I still use the e-reader, in particular when I'm traveling. I find it very comfortable just to put that in my bag instead of putting 3 books in my bag, and off I go on my trip around the world, and I have my e-reader with me, and it's easy to read even in the dark and stuff like that. But I find myself, for example, if I'm reading fiction, it's easier to read on the e-reader than if it's non-fiction. I have to have the physical book. But again, I use both, and I think this is the thing. I think a lot of people are not using both, and they're just going into the digital space. When I think there's lots of advantages, in a physical book compared to the digital version or the audio version, because a lot of books are listened to these days because people are busy. So they're in the gym, they're walking between one meeting and another, or they're in the car driving from one appointment to the other. They put the audio book on, and that's a great thing to have. But, I still think the physical book, in fact, they did say in the very beginning that, bookshops were going to disappear. No, they're not, because people are still buying books. And even though I buy most of my books on Amazon, every time I'm in a place and I've got some time, I walk into a bookstore and I always walk out with at least 2 or 3 books.
The best thing about bookshops, I love books, and I've been to hundreds of bookshops over the years. I go to a bookshop and I see nothing there I like or I want to buy, but I have the pleasure of simply being around other people who love books. Is that enough? That's enough. I mean, how does it have to be? It's not as though somehow you've got to shoot for the stars and have an extraordinary experience every single day. Sometimes I go to the bookshop, I don't meet anybody at all. It's also fine.
And you can have some interesting conversations with people.
Of course you can. Of course you can. The other thing I also find, I like having a physical book on my lap, on the tube. It piques people's interest in many cases. People ask you what it is, or maybe they read something else by the same author. But in a way, it's a very, very gentle form of introduction. It doesn't require any formal announcement. It's not as though somebody said, by the way, there's something between, Holborn and Chancery Lane, I want to announce this in my book. No, people find that very casual way. That's a good thing as well. It's a good thing. I think the difficult thing is, we live in a world that is very, very rules driven. And people's fear of somehow not observing the right protocol, the correct procedure, doing what they did last time, what's not going to upset the apple. Yeah, I understand that to a degree, but it becomes excessive. And I think, again, you see that, in the desire for ever greater speed and ever greater efficiency, people in senior roles are just as guilty of not taking time and not encouraging people around them to think, to listen, maybe change their mind. It's all about getting on to the next stage, making more, spreading your kind of your network or spreading your influence. I think it matters a great deal. There are some people who are very driven by the idea, whatever they have, it's not enough. I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I'd rather think to myself, I've got to the end, now I'll do something different. Well, either.
It's been great having you on the show. Your book is Leave Your Phone at the Door, The Joy of Offline. We'll be posting the link below for people to order the book. And I encourage, reading this book, the physical book.
I can show you, I've got one copy. I can show you actually here, in case anyone wants to look. That is it. My finger out of the way. That's one side. And the other side, quite interesting in a way, that is a vox pop I did in New York, interviewing people in the street. I asked them 2 questions only. Number 1, when did you last leave home without your phone? And number 2, what would you do more of if your phone wasn't permanently attached to your side? Very interesting.
That's
Anyway,
2 interesting questions.
enough talking from me. Everything's in the book. What I would say, just in conclusion to everybody listening, live your life. The phone is great, but the phone is really an adjunct to real life.